everyone. My name is Councillor Miles Ponder. I'd like to welcome members of the public, colleagues and officers to this meeting. I'll be chairing tonight's meeting, and to manage the business as efficiently as possible, I'll invite people to speak one at a time to ensure their contributions are properly heard. Therefore, please do not speak unless invited to do so by me. Thank you in advance for your assistance. Fire evacuation procedure, I won't go through it because I will do, because there are some visitors in the stands. On hearing the fire alarm, please leave the building immediately using the nearest available exit over there. Do not under any circumstances use the lift. The assembly point is in the area in the Civic Office car park next to the roundabout. You should not attempt to re-enter the building until it's known to be safe to do so. Agenda item 1 is membership, and I can confirm there are no changes. I'd like to remind members about the election-related restrictions. By-election is due to be held on the 24th of July at Borough and Town Council level. Business as usual continues, but pre-election guidance requires that members avoid making overtly party political points. Officers have in turn avoided scheduling politically sensitive matters. I hope we'll stay on a topic and respect the electoral process in this meeting. Agenda item 2 is communications and apologies. We've received apologies from Councillor Maurice Bright. I'd like to welcome for item number 5 Councillor Christian Gray and Liz Gore, who's the policy manager. And for items 6 and 7, I'd like to welcome Councillor Shenton, along with Lisa Baldock, the procurement manager, and Kirsten Brown, the head of procurement. For item 9, we have Councillor Nick Oakley, who'll be joining us. And I'd also like to welcome George Parvey, the planning strategy and implementation manager. Apologies if I've missed anybody. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest to declare? No, thank you. Agenda item 4 was the minutes. So the minutes of the 17th of June 2025 approved as a correct record. Agreed. Thank you. I'll sign those afterwards. And agenda item 5 we'll move to, which is the grants to the voluntary sector, the annual report, and this will be presented by Liz Gore along with Councillor Christian Gray. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So tonight I'm going to give you a short presentation on the direct support that we as a council provide to the community and voluntary sector. I'm going to primarily focus on the financial support, but I do recognise that there are other ways that we work together and build relationships between us as a council and the voluntary community sector. So the total allocation for voluntary sector funding across 24-25 was 491,000, and I'm going to take you through how this amount was allocated, specifically looking at partnership agreements, our community grants, so the allocation of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund and our councillor WIS scheme. So firstly, as a council, we recognise the challenges that many voluntary organisations face in securing ongoing funding. Many funds are one-off project funding, and the majority don't allow funding of ongoing running costs. Historically, we as a council have looked to support a small number of organisations who provide key services to our residents through our partnership agreements. These are as close to an ongoing commitment to funding that we make, although funding is always considered through the budget setting process each year. And the aim of them is to provide some stability for those key local organisations. And these funds are able to be used for general operational costs, so rather than being tied to specific projects or services. We have a close relationship with all of the organisations and meet regularly with them, primarily to monitor their activities, but in reality, these meetings provide information about our communities and have allowed us to build strong relationships with those organisations. A great example of that is the Citizens Advice, who work very closely with both our housing team and our revenues and benefits team to support clients. And Communities First, who continue to deliver a range of activities in the community for us, for example, our Healthy Hub services. Another key part of our support is the annual community grant scheme. And just to clarify, these figures relate to 2024-25. We awarded 27 grants of up to 2,500 through this scheme to fund a range of activities across the borough. In this particular year, we encouraged applications to support creative activities and activities that celebrate our diverse communities. And in that way, we try to link the delivery of the community grant scheme back to our corporate priorities and objectives. Decisions are made by the grants panel, which is both cross-party and has representatives from wards across the borough. So as you can see, the majority of applications are from Boreham Wood, and the grants panel talked quite detailed this year about how we might choose to, or might be able to try to spread the applications better. And really, I would encourage you as ward councillors to solicit applications where you can. In terms of timing, this scheme tends to open soon into the new financial year, with decisions being made in June, so that organisations can have as much time as possible to spend that funding. I would also say that the number of applications have increased dramatically over recent years to this fund, and we're often really oversubscribed. So for the current financial year, 25-26, we had applications in totalling up to £90,000 against a budget of approximately £50,000. So you should all know and be familiar with our Ward Improvement Initiative scheme. So each councillor has £750 to allocate to projects in their local area. These projects tend to be smaller scale, although members do tend to club together to deliver more impactful projects across ward areas. So also, as you can see in terms of timing, most of the applications come in later in the year, so just a little plea from us to spend your money whilst you can. One of the things that we regularly do is to allocate funding to small grant schemes to support specific celebration events. Historically, we've linked them to the coronation or the Jubilee celebrations. So given that last year was our 50th anniversary, we ran a scheme for grants of up to £750 for groups to run events or for small-scale capital projects. These small grant schemes have been really successful. We have seen a lot of applications to these. The small amount of money doesn't seem to put people off. Lots and lots of groups use them for special celebration events, and they've proved super popular. So it is something that we'd like to do moving forward, bearing in mind that the funding that we use for this has to be balanced against the overall support budget. So the community lottery is another way that we're able to support organisations, but at limited cost to the council. The lottery was launched in 2021 and provides a free platform for organisations to raise funds. It's free for them to register, and organisations are provided with a range of support and promotional materials. Individual organisations and good causes are responsible for selling tickets to their supporters. Each ticket is £1, and supporters are able to win prizes ranging from free tickets to cash prizes ranging from £25 through to £25,000. There's also regular prize draws for holidays and prize bundles that are provided across all of the different lotteries by our lottery operator. So as you can see there, for every £1 ticket sold, 50p is paid back directly to the good cause every month. We've got 49 registered good causes and have raised nearly £30,000 in the last 4 years for our local good causes. This is a lot better split than the other lotteries, so than the National Lottery or the Health Lottery, for example. So it's something that we encourage lots of organisations to do. It works better for those organisations with lots of members, so sports clubs, Potters Bar Cycling Club, for example. It works less better where organisations are delivering services. So it's just something in our kind of support that we're able to provide. So we've also allocated some of our UK shared prosperity funding to support the voluntary sector. Over the 4 years of the UK SPF, Hertsmere have received an overall allocation of £1.4 million, which in addition to supplementing some of the community grants fund, we've also spent that funding on initiatives to support local businesses, providing wraparound support to bring people back into the labour market, and to fund capital improvements to parks and community facilities. 2025-26 is the last year of the fund. One of the projects that we've been able to use UK Shared Prosperity for has been the Recollections Through Art project, which has brought local people in touch with their local area, using exhibits from our local museums to inspire creative projects. The project was awarded a Hertfordshire Association of Museums Award to recognise the value of that project in improving local quality of life. Most of the participants are linked through some of our chatter table activities, so they tend to be older or more isolated members of our community. We've been able to fund the project sessions in Boreham Wood and Potters Bar, and we're really pleased to say that the project's been able to secure funding from outside the UK SPF to deliver additional sessions in both Potters Bar and Boreham Wood. So, as I said, this presentation is focused on financial support that we provide, but it is worth noting that we also use our community convening role to bring organisations together, to share information, build relationships, and where appropriate to deliver in partnership. This takes place largely under the auspices of our local strategic partnership, Hertsmere Together, and its topic-focused subgroups. So, yeah, hopefully that's been of interest to you. I'm happy to take any questions. Just lastly to say that we'll be uploading this presentation onto the website so that members of the community can see the support that we provide.
Thank you, yeah. I just want to ask a few questions really around the Hertsmere Lottery, because obviously it was, as you say, launched. I remember when we sat in this chamber and it was launched in 2021. The 49 registered causes, is that every year they have to register, or is that the current amount? Have we seen some drop off? Are we encouraging any more to participate in that? And are we seeing that they've had different monies allocated to them from that lottery, you know, years, stuff like that? A bit more detail around that would be handy. Thank you.
Yeah, so it is really variable. An organisation wouldn't drop off, but I guess if they're not selling any tickets, then, you know, they will remain, but they won't be receiving any funding. We haven't asked anybody to leave, but I guess if there's zero activity over a number of years, we would probably look through. It's not our responsibility as a council to sell tickets to individuals, but it is our role to encourage organisations to join the lottery, and we would try to support them to then go on to sell tickets. So we do that. So, for example, when we communicate about our grants, we always include a note on the bottom encouraging people to join the lottery. The amounts that people get absolutely vary, and like I said, it very much depends on how active they are in terms of selling tickets and really the type of organisation they are. So football clubs, member organisations do tend to do well. I wouldn't say that this is at all something that could replace grant funding. The amount of money people are getting on a monthly basis isn't enough for them to do anything really meaningful, but what it does mean is that they can count on some regular income. People say that it helps them with publicity, or it just tops up budgets across the board. So we do have positive feedback, but it really is about that member organisation being motivated to sell the tickets.
Councillor Kazar.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions from my side. Just focusing on the WIS applications and so on. You mentioned, and this is something I raised up last year also when you made the presentation, because it seems that you make most of the decisions during June, right? But then I'm just looking at the presentation, and I see most of the applications are applied during Q3, Q4. So what's the scheme of having those decisions or decision makings later in the year? And then I've got a second question also.
Just on that one, so the Ward Improvement Initiative scheme sits with members to encourage organisations to apply. The decisions are actually made by the individual member, so it's not something that we would do internally. We have the processes around due diligence and application processing, but if you as a member wanted to encourage an organisation to apply, then you can absolutely do that, and the decision sits with the individual councillor to make that decision. So it kind of doesn't matter when the applications are received or spent. That budget sits with you, that 750 sits with each individual councillor throughout the year. I guess it just is better. It would just be nicer for us administratively if we had an even spread.
Okay, then on a related note, if, for example, we allocate some to an organisation for some event or something, for example, and it doesn't happen, what happens then? As a council, do you look at the thing and say, oh, X event didn't happen by this community, do you withdraw it, or do you reassess it if it comes back at a later year?
I don't think we've ever had that happen in my knowledge that I've been administering the scheme. However, if we were to award a grant for something and that event didn't take place, then yeah, we would absolutely look to get that funding back unless the organisation could convince us that they could, and the councillor in particular agreed that they would be happy to reallocate those funds. But if someone applied for something, it didn't happen, then yes, we would absolutely look to get that funding back. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Quilty?
Thank you. On the community slide grant, it's a pie chart which is divided into locality sort of settlements, but there's one section of the pie chart which is in yellow, I think, and it says 7% and it's got Hertsmere. Does that mean that these funds are spent outside of Hertsmere, or what area or township is
so
that 7% to represent?
that would be a borough-wide project.
A borough-wide project.
So it might be an organisation, for example, it wouldn't be the Citizens' Advice, but like the Citizens' Advice, that would cross the entirety of the borough.
I doubt if it's that, because Citizens Advice
No,
have
it's,
got quite a
sorry,
big...
that was an example, but it's not them. It's not them, but that's an example of or Communities First, for example, or some specific project that would benefit residents across the entire borough rather than in one.
So the other,
ward.
so I can take it then that the other divisions in this pie chart, say for example, Boreham Wood gets 52% of the £47,000 which was allocated. That would be spent totally in Boreham Wood. It wouldn't be spent in Potters. Any of it, that money wouldn't be spent in Potters Bar or whatever.
We have to, I guess in this case we've had to make a
it's just
decision. So
confusing.
it's it's where the majority of the funding would be spent,
Where the
or where the
majority
project would be best. I can't tell you that every single pound. It would depend.
No,
so, for example, a Boreham Wood-based football club that received a grant, that would be in the Boreham Wood one. A Potters Bar-based organisation would be in the Potters Bar one.
Okay, I understand it says yes, majority. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Hello. I just wanted to clarify the definition of a good cause. Do you have to qualify in some way? And is there a minimum amount of tickets that you have to sell? Is there a limit to,
On the lottery?
Yes, sorry,
Yeah,
on the lottery,
no,
beg
that's
your
fine.
pardon.
The definition of good cause for the lottery is broader than we would have for our community grants, for example. The idea being that we would want that to be as open as possible, and we match our criteria with those of the other community lotteries across the country. So, for example, on our community grants, we wouldn't necessarily let a school apply. It would have to be a PTA. That's a bit broader for the community lottery. All of the information about due diligence and qualification is available on the lottery website if anyone was to have any queries, or I can share with you the proper definition of good cause. In terms of minimum ticket spend, no, there isn't a minimum ticket spend, but I guess if you're going to register, you're registering to raise funds. So you would try to sell some, at least, but there is no minimum.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you. I'm looking at the partnership agreements, which are fine. I'm just looking at the numbers, really, where we're giving just over 415,000 out. And it's really just trying to understand the numbers more than anything else. I see that we're giving 257,000 just over to Citizens' Advice, which I fully support. So that's where I'm coming from to start with. But obviously, what I'm trying to understand is how this is spread across the borough. Does it go into a central pot, or does it get distributed? For instance, in Bushy, I know that there is a facility there, and I'm sure there is in many other areas. I'm just trying to understand how the money gets distributed, or is that not part of our remit? It is part of citizens' advice. Thank you.
Yeah, we wouldn't ask. That's part of the importance of this fund, that they can use that funding to deliver services in the way that they best see fit. What I would say is that we meet with them on a quarterly basis, and we have a really clear understanding of where their funding goes through that monitoring report. And I can and do share the dashboard more widely with councillors and can provide you with that information. We get really detailed information around client numbers from them. Yes, of course.
Councillor Lamb. Oh,
I just want to add, with regard to citizens' advice, I mean, the work that they're doing, I wish we could give them more money, and I'm glad you agree with us. But only last week we had our partnership meeting with them. This quarter alone, they've helped 1,116 people who have needed their services. And what citizens' advice are finding much more now is that people are turning up in crisis. It's not one little problem or a parking ticket or they need to help with a form. They are literally eviction notices, court dates, etc., and multiple problems. It's a much bigger picture to tackle, and they are dealing where they can. So wherever that need is, they will be there to support, whether that be Bushy, Boreham Wood, Potters Bar, etc. They will be where they need to be and do as much work as they possibly can. So I wish we could do more, but unfortunately our hands are tied.
If I could just explain the rationale, I'm really trying to understand where in the borough, and it's less about money and more about the issues, where we're currently having problems is what I'm trying to understand.
I think, yes, and I think that would probably be something we can share on the dashboard to show you kind of the types of problems we're having, where in the borough those things are coming from. I don't think it would be a shock to most people in the areas of multiple deprivation. We see much more usage of citizens' advice than we do in more affluent areas. But of course, there are still problems that need help in those areas as well, with disability benefits, claiming forms, all those kind of things. So they are across the entirety of the borough in the work that they do.
Councillor Lambert.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a couple of questions. The first one is in relation to the community grants. I noticed that there isn't a segment in the pie for Radlett or Aldenham. Is that because there were no applications for there? To begin with, I thought, well, perhaps this is because we've got a parish council, but of course, Elstree and Boreham Wood have got a town council. So is it no applications from Radlett?
I'll have to double check. That may well be the case. I'll have a double check and I'll let you know on that one if that's okay. But looking at the graph, I would assume that may well be the case, but I will double check and confirm.
Okay, thank you. And my other question, I suppose, is about it is about the community lottery. And it started in December 21. So if my arithmetic is right, that's 3.5 years it's been going. 50% goes to good causes, and it says £28,509 has been raised for good causes. So that equates to something like 57,000 tickets being sold in 3.5 years. Is it a weekly lottery? It is a weekly. So that equates to 20,000 tickets a year, which is about 400 tickets a week. It doesn't sound very much. I mean, I know that we're not selling them. It's the good causes that are having to sell them. But that's a pretty poor sales ratio, I would have thought. If something like 49 registered causes are only selling 400 a week, it works out at somewhere about each cause selling 8 tickets as an average.
Yeah, I think, like I said, they're not making massive amount of money, and it really is down to the individual good causes to sell more tickets. And obviously, we would like them to sell more tickets. So it does vary between good causes. Some people are really active and really positive, and others have kind of signed up and don't do too much activity. So yes, it does vary, and that is about right.
It's an average of £4 per organisation per week, which I think is not a great return. Should we perhaps be considering either we step up the action to try and get more tickets sold, or should we start being a bit more ruthless about organisations that aren't selling many tickets?
Yeah, that certainly is something that we could consider. I would say that it doesn't cost us anything for those organisations to sit there. The lottery doesn't cost us anything other than the publicity that we do and the time, officer time spent around due diligence. So yes, we absolutely can review if the committee thinks that that's a worthwhile exercise.
Yeah. And just to make another point then, I mean, something like 20% is going to admin and VAT. That's quite a high level of admin for whoever's organising it, and they're not going to volunteer to have less organisations. But the efficiency of this operation of the community lottery, it's ringing alarm bells whether it's as efficient as it should be if we're part of it. I just leave that thought.
Okay, I'll take your point. I would say that it is zero. Other than the initial setup costs, it does not cost the council anything at all to run the lottery. That admin and VAT goes to not the VAT, but the administration fee is paid through our lottery operator, Gatherwell. And they run the majority of lotteries across the country at the minute, of good cause lotteries, and most of our councils across Hertfordshire do have similar lotteries like this.
I don't believe there's any further questions, so the committee happy to note the report. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Right, we'll now move on to agenda item 6, which is the procurement update for Q1 of 2025-2026. This is going to be presented by Kirsten Brown, who's the head of procurement. Thank you.
There are two PowerPoint files open. We've just seen one, and then yours is the other one.
Sorry, if I just present the report, the quarterly report first, which you've all got a copy of. It's looking at the first quarter of activity, which is relatively quiet. Our procurement strategy has been approved, and we are starting to work on the action plan. Some training has been delivered, and more training will be delivered in September. We're working through our templates and refining them as we use them. Other stuff on there is embedded and will progress through the course of the year. In terms of the projects coming forward, again, a relatively short list, and that was the state of those projects at the time this was published. So if anyone's got any questions or queries on the report.
Would anyone like to ask any questions on that initial stage? Yeah, Councillor Quilty.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question about local bodies applying for contracts within this procurement report, is there any, have we made special provision so that there is a weight given to local companies to actually apply for projects that the council want to achieve, so as that we are protecting our local economy? Thank you.
Provisions in our contract procurement rules, low value under 20 grand, it is expected that they invite local suppliers if they can find suitable local suppliers. So the very lowest level, the expectation is that you look local. At the higher level procurements, where we're introducing an element of social value evaluation, and I'll touch on this later, there is social value in being local. And they're able to gain additional evaluation through the sheer fact they employ locally, they spend with a local supply chain.
Follow that up. Can I just ask about this social value situation? Can you explain that a bit further? Because I'm not a procurement person, but I do know how to buy a coffee or whatever. So when I go, so therefore I can't understand what social value is in relation to purchasing something.
It does come up in the presentation, but I can talk about it now if you prefer.
Is that in the presentation?
It is in the presentation.
Do you want to? Okay. I think Councillor Quezada, do you have a question for now regarding this list?
Yeah, just a quick question. Regarding current procurements, I finally see that the reception refurb is on the list. Could you offer a timeline of when it might be awarded or completed or anything on those lines?
Yeah. Being developed at the moment, it's likely it will go out to competition in the next couple of weeks. So the award will follow on from that once suppliers have had a chance to look and bid and be evaluated. So exactly when isn't quite finalised yet.
So just to clarify, you couldn't possibly offer a end date of when the works might be completed?
It would be the engineers.
Yeah, I just think, to be fair, that's a question for the asset management team rather than procurement, and it will flow from the consideration of the tenders and the mobilisation of the contracts. But yeah, until those tenders have been received and analysed, I don't think it's something that could be answered. Asset management would be able to put some kind of timeline to it, but it would be all subject to the tender process.
Should we now move on? Thank you.
I'd like to present with my colleague Lisa the procurement changes for 2025. So our in procurement's big change is having the Procurement Act 2023 come into force in February. The purpose of the Procurement Act is to reform the UK's public procurement regime following the fact we left Europe. It should be creating a simpler and more transparent system. The reforms are guided by our principles: value for money, public good, transparency, integrity. It brings with it streamlined new procedures that are intended to save time for public bodies and suppliers, and means better commercial outcomes. A key part of it is to help improve SMEs and VCSEs' ability to bid for local government and government contracts. So we now have a duty to consider reducing barriers wherever we can. We have a pipeline notice and a planned procurement notices, which are new, to give more opportunity for warming up the market, letting them know what's coming. And a huge push on doing more pre-market engagement, so giving chance for suppliers to help shape our specifications, enable the art of the possible to be explored with suppliers where appropriate. We have a duty to consider putting the contract into lots, So dividing it into smaller and more accessible contract opportunities. The Find a Tender service will be a central digital platform for one place for suppliers to register, input and keep up to date their details, find contract opportunities, and see the transparency on the current contracts that are ongoing across the country. So this is bringing some key changes for us. So one of our key changes around the pre-procurement stage. So when we're really thinking about how we're taking things to market, we have that new duty to consider the barriers for SMEs. We have a continuous sort of making sure the process is proportionate to the contract, to consider dividing into lots, ensuring our financial threshold in terms of turnover, etc., is proportionate. We consider open days, we consider our selling to the council guide, demystifying the procurement process where we get the opportunity to. So I say we are now expected to do some pre-market engagement prior to going to the market, and we have to own up to the fact we have or haven't done so. We have a lot more notices we need to publish to keep that transparency going. There is now a pipeline notice, which is a forward plan for all contracts over 2 million in the next 18 months. Now, admittedly, Hertsmere as a council is smaller than the requirement, so we don't need to do that. We will look to do that going forward, but we don't need to at this point in time. And obviously we don't have all that many contracts of that value in our pipeline. We can also use a planned procurement notice, and then most importantly and the most used one will be the pre-market engagement. Another key change is actually the change in procedures. So we've now got 2 procedures to choose from: open, which is to the world and its wife, and it's all in one process, or the competitive flexible, which can be designed to best suit that particular contract and that particular market. These days, if we are excluding suppliers, that can result in them being added to the department list. We've moved from meet to MAT. So meet was most economically advantageous tender to just most advantageous tender. And this allows us to have more flex to include social and environmental considerations. We will have to give an assessment summary to bidders with their scores and those of the winners, which is slightly different from the current standstill letters. And a direct award to a supplier without competition will be much more challenging to justify. So again, this comes with more notices. We'll have a tender notice to advertise, as we always have, but 2 notices of contract award, one that kicks off our standstill period, and then one that details fully what the contract is, with whom, etc. And there's timelines around those, so we need to be quite quick in being transparent. And the last one there is the transparency notice, where we're using a direct award. Another key change from the Act is contract management. So whereas our previous procurement rules were incredibly light on what we should do around managing contracts, this time we have a lot more rules about how we are transparent in our contract management. So we now must collect and publish a lot more information. We have a new national standard for KPIs. So where a contract is over £5 million worth, we now have to publish what our key 3 KPIs are, and then keep publishing every year how it's going. We also have to report a lot more partial breaches, award of damages, settlement agreements, but those are quite rare. Another stage we have to consider more than we did before is where we're modifying a contract. There's a lot more publication of our modifications, and we have to be quite aware that where we might have let that contract as under threshold, if we modify it enough, it suddenly becomes in scope for the rest of the transparency requirements. Where we're doing a contract over 5 million, we now have to publish a redacted copy of it within 90 days. And for all contracts, we're publishing a change notice as and when we make modifications. So we could be publishing quite a lot of notices. A lot more transparency. So moving on from the Procurement Act, our procurement strategy was recently updated and published. So it's reflected in the current corporate plan. It's in line with the current national policy statement, which was part of the Procurement Act. It was approved along with our contract procedure rules in February, and the action plan will be reported in these meetings. Our contract procedure rules were updated at the same time. We didn't change the principles. Whatever we're buying, large or small, we compete as a default. We still must run a fair and transparent process at all levels, keep our good records. And again, the rigour of the process is dependent on the contract value. And the value, when we're talking about it, is the whole cost to the council for that sort of thing. And that runs over a 4-year period if it's sort of something that just generally runs on. So we moved our thresholds for where we follow our processes up slightly to reflect inflation and to reflect good practice. So as you can see, we're up in the quotation bracket up to £100,000 these days, and we do encourage the use of national framework agreements where that is the most appropriate route to market. And then social value. So all our service and works contracts that are over the quote value, we expect a 10% of the evaluation to be allocated to additional social value. So 90% of our evaluation is against our price and our quality aspects, and this 10% is around what else they can bring that benefits the community and both locally and nationally and the environment over and above what we're asking them to do in the specification. So this could include, on a bigger contract, apprenticeships, volunteering time, monies to voluntary organisations. It can be improving the welfare of their own staff, mental health training. There are a lot of possible ways in which they can add social value. So we are doing our own evaluation on it if it's less than threshold, but at the higher value ones we use the social value portal, which is a nationally recognised portal for evaluating and showing that, showing off, basically showing what is being achieved. And we do try to use additional social value as evaluation tool when we're using a framework. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't, but we do try. Which brings me to any questions.
Councillor Morris, I believe your hand went up first.
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand the process on the different types of contract, because obviously this can cover any number of areas, and I'm specifically focusing at the moment on things that may involve any form of construction or like this building as an example. And I would like to understand the form of contract that you use, because within building contracts, construction companies normally earn more out of the variations on the contract than the contract itself. So I want to try and understand how that process is managed.
Yes, so the contracts are that we use differing sort of terms on contracts. So we have service terms for service contracts, and as you're talking about construction-based contracts, we will use. Generally, we'd look at JCT, and occasionally we would look at NEC or some other variations, but as a default normally would be a JCT contract.
Councillor Kazar, you are next.
Thank you, Chair. So, since the Act has come into force, I just want to know, just looking at the threshold slide, has Hertsmere had any applications, lack of a better word, had any applications that fits into any of these criteria? And if you could give a kind of indication of how many, I don't know, applications have come forward that you have to assess.
Sorry, Lisa. Our first one that will go out under these rules will actually be the weed spray. So that the documents are still under preparation. As a council, we don't have that many of the over threshold value, and quite a lot of the time it's most advantageous to use a framework agreement. So in terms of running our own tenders, they're not a week by week occurrence. And as it happens, we haven't yet put one out under the Procurement Act. That one's going out in the next few weeks.
Councillor Lambert.
I'd like to talk about the thresholds as well. Just to ask a point of clarification, you've got the one quotation process, minimum 3 bidders, advertised below threshold tender. The fourth line of that is advertised in line with Procurement Act 23 procedures. The value, if goods or services, 175,000. Oh, hang on, I've answered my own question.
It's over 100.
Right, okay. Fine, okay. So what was it before these figures came out?
In terms of moving from a quote to an open tender, we were on 75,000 or 250. So the movement upwards has only been on the services.
And so what was the value of the works for over? The value of the works, if they're over 4.4 million, what was that figure before?
Actually, that figure hasn't changed. So the Procurement Act threshold hasn't changed. It's changed every 2 years, so we've actually had no change on those two limits.
Fine. Thank you. I was misreading it.
Doesn't seem that members have any further questions. So in that case, can we note the first part of the report, which was the procurement update for Q1 of 2025-2026. And then, thank you, and then we'll note the procurement regulations update of 2025. Thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item 8, which is the quarterly financial monitoring, Q4 of 2024-2025, which will be presented by Matthew Bunyan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So you've got a report in front of you, which reports on the final position for the 24-25 financial year, so shows our outturn position against budget. The monitoring covers the 4 areas which I'm sure the committee will be more than familiar with in terms of revenue, capital, treasury monitoring and debtor monitoring. So what I'll propose to do is just go through some of the highlights of each of those appendices. I'll obviously take the report as read and I'll just highlight some of the key elements if that's okay. So in terms of Appendix 1, which shows the revenue outturn position, so overall we showed a net surplus at the end of the year, just over 1.9 million, and that, as you will see, is mainly due to a favourable investment income. If you look at the summary on page 37 of your agenda, or page 3 of that appendix, it does show that services did collectively show a net surplus of about 145k. That obviously includes variances in either direction, and I'll focus on some of the more significant ones in a moment. There was a slight pressure on some of the corporate budgets, so the general expenses budget, which exists really to pick up anything that arises during the year that can't be allocated specifically to a service, and also includes things like audit fees and banking charges. And then obviously the investment interest shows a significant surplus, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. In terms of the service areas, the main variances that I'll just highlight were in relation to environmental health, which showed a favourable variance of 154k, and that was mainly due to the fact that we had quite a significant additional number of vehicle licences during the year. So we had a whole new company came over to us and bought all their vehicles to us, and we've subsequently licensed, so it's created a lot of additional work, and we're obviously benefiting from the income from that, although it has put a lot of pressure on that particular department. In relation to street scene, we're showing overall a net favourable variance of 260k. Again, there's various variances within the service, but I would say probably the main reason for that surplus is in relation to parking income, both in terms of penalty charge notices and parking fees. And there's an income analysis table 5A on page 46 of the pack, which sort of sets out the different levels of income that we've received from parking. On asset management, unfortunately the service is showing an adverse variance of 367k. There was some overspend in terms of employees, but that was more than offset by the additional income, and actually some of those employees were specifically brought in to look at the income side of things in terms of sort of garage rents and lease renewals, etc. So actually that's mainly the reason for the overspend on employees, and say we recovered a lot of that through additional income. But there were some variances in relation to sort of premises related costs, additional business rates, essential repairs that needed to be undertaken, sort of health and safety repairs around electrical works, etc., that you can't avoid. There was also quite some significant costs of bringing void TA properties, so properties that have been returned, bringing them back to standard so we can let them again. And there were some consultancy costs in relation to feasibility works that had been committed to, but which we were unable to capitalise because those schemes didn't necessarily go ahead, or may not have gone ahead yet. I mentioned the investment income. Obviously that makes up the majority of our year-end surplus, and the reason for that surplus, a couple of reasons. We had higher than expected interest rates throughout the year, and I'll touch on that more when I do the Treasury Management Report. And obviously that means we're getting higher returns on our investments. We also had a higher level of balances to invest due to changes to the capital programme, as well as some slippage on the capital programme. And again, I'll touch on that in the capital report, but ultimately we had about £13 million of additional funding through just the capital programme that we were investing throughout the year that otherwise we were anticipating to spend. So that's the reason for such a significant return on our investment income. And I just wanted to highlight that of that surplus, so the 1.9 million, we've allocated that a significant amount of that to the Civic Office FWD project. That was agreed by council, so about 1.6 million. So members will probably recall that report where additional funding was sought, and that's where we agreed to fund it from. There was also agreement that we would set aside 100,000 for the feasibility works on the waste depot, and then that leaves a year-end surplus of 228k, and that will be applied to the general fund surplus in accordance with our reserves policy, which is to increase our general fund reserve in line with inflation each year. And I'd finally just sort of sorry, bear with me a second, I'll just check it. I don't think it's in this report, I think that's for the other one. I was going to just mention about our reserves. We did commit a significant amount of our reserves, and I'll mention that again more in the capital report because it's more appropriate for that. So that's appendix 1. I'll pause there if there's any questions on that.
Councillor Quilty?
Yeah, thank you very much. On, I don't know if you've covered it yet, I might be too early. Street scene services, have you gone through that yet?
Yeah, in terms of revenue, I did mention that, yeah.
Yeah, page 11 of the thing. I'm just curious, could you expand, Matthew, whereabouts is the sinking fund for replacement of waste vehicles in all this? And how much do we actually hold in that fund at the moment? Thank you.
I couldn't tell you how much we hold in that fund without going and looking at my list of reserves. But we do set money aside annually through the street scene budget, so that will be included under the third-party payments, I believe. Or no, it might be under the transfer payments. I think that 271k under transfer payments is the funds that we pay into. We've got various.
Well, maybe it would help. Maybe it would help, Mr. Chairman, if we actually sort of if he gave us a short email to all members of the committee on this particular item as to how much is in the sinking fund currently and how much are we putting into it per year. It'd be easier rather than just going off on one. Yeah, might be easier doing it that way. Getting it written back to all members of the committee. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'll do that through the committee clerk. I'll send it.
Thank you very much. I believe Councillor Casal had a question as well.
Thank you, Chair. Just for the committee's kind of reference, I'm on page 43 or page 9 of your report, Matthew. This is regarding environmental health. Within supplies and services, it says, the last line says, there's also a cost of 4.5k in relation to a contribution to the Herts County Council Better Business for All scheme, which was unbudgeted. So my question is, are there any other schemes within any of the services and departments that's unbudgeted?
I mean, I think things like this do come up from time to time. As a collective, as a county, we might join into a collective partnership around something. So this was something that came up during the year. We agreed that we would make a contribution, as the other authorities also did. I couldn't tell you that there's necessarily anything within any other budgets, but that's why we generally have a contingency budget. But we'll always look to the service's own budget first, and if they're in surplus, then we would fund any costs such as that from within their own budget. Otherwise, we'll call on this, the contingency if it's required. So there's always contingency in the budget to cover unforeseen costs.
Chair, if I may. Just to clarify then, in terms of the contingency budget, roughly how much is there in the budget that you have allocated? And then just an estimate would do.
No, the contingency budget is set out in the pack on page 56. So every year we set aside a contingency budget of 300,000. Bearing in mind this is for 24/5, we allocated nearly 279,000 of that during the year, and that will be through members' decisions either at Cabinet or Council, where those one-off fundings or additions to the budget will agreed. Where that is repeat funding year after year, those amounts are then added into the budget process for the next financial year.
I don't think there's any further questions for now, so if you're happy to move forward.
Okay, if I move on to capital then. So obviously again we're looking at the position as at the end of 24/5, and what we're showing in the table at 2.1 is the approved budget. What I would say though, this is the budget that was approved at council in February 25, which was a movement from the original budget because we actually took around £7 million out of the original budget in relation to the studios scheme that we agreed we weren't going to progress with. So this is the approved budget as at February 25 rather than the one that was approved at the beginning of the year. So it's just showing the changes since that point. The most significant change being that we've added in a £2 million loan. It says development company, but it's actually a loan to our stockholding company, HLL, in relation to one of the development schemes that we sold the stock to them, and they're now letting on our behalf. In total then, during the year, we spent about 20.4 million around that revised budget position of 26.7 million, so quite a significant in-year spend. We did, however, have slippage of just over 6 million, and I'll say if I just comment on a couple of the key schemes, so there's around 2.2 million of that related to development schemes which are progressing at the moment and are close to planning or are at planning stage now and will be progressed this year. We had about £1.5 million of SIL projects that were approved during the year and had started, but they hadn't spent all of those funds at that point, and obviously we pay the funds over as they spend them rather than in one lump sum. And then there was £1 million in relation to the health and safety works at the studios, stages 7, 8 and 9, that were agreed in February, so they were never going to get spent by the end of this year, and those works are actually underway at the moment and near to completion. So that was the main sort of slippage. I'd just ask members just to note that our revised programme which is set out in table 3 at 2.8 shows that we've got a revised capital programme for 25/6 of 19.975 million, so that includes that slippage from 24/5, and I say we're progressing through that programme at the moment. And then just finally on capital, I would just ask members to note the capital reserves which are set out in 2.10. We spent just about 4.1 million of our capital reserves during the year to fund that overall programme. Other funding sources would have included grant funding, drawdown from revenue reserves such as the vehicle reserve that Councillor Quilty was mentioned earlier, and also we've got an element that is earmarked as borrowing, but currently we're funding through internal borrowing due to our cash balances. But I would also ask members to note that under the current programme for 25/6, we are looking to spend about a further 8.8 million of our reserves, so we are seeing our capital reserves depleting due to the investment we're making in our capital programme. So by the end of 25/6, our capital receipts will be close to zero, albeit we will top those up. If we sell any assets, we'll put that back into capital receipts. Our capital grants will be pretty much utilised. Section 106 will have around 3 million left in balances, which can be invested in new affordable housing schemes. Our most significant element of funding remains as the community infrastructure levy at around 19 million, but of course that can only be used for new infrastructure, which is a requirement due to development and growth in the area. So, and I know there's a number of schemes that are likely to come forward this year. That was all I wanted to say on capital. Happy to take any questions there.
Councillor Quilty.
Back again. Matthew, purchase of street scene vehicles. On the spreadsheet here, it's got a budget 423,000 roughly, capital budget, but it seems to be ending up as a negative 779,000. I'm wondering if you can explain that, or how does it work? Because maybe it's correct. I don't know. I'm just a bit confused. Huh?
It's just there's a slight overspend against that budget of 779 pounds. So it wasn't a significant overspend, but it was a slight overspend up against that budget, but it's within the tolerances that are allowed in the under the Constitution. So we just record that as an overspend, and it makes up the net position on the capital programme. But all of that was funded from the reserve.
I haven't seen any further hands, so should we move on with the next section?
Sorry, in relation to Treasury Management, I think I've obviously touched on this already. Just a little bit of background, I suppose, and I'm sorry this didn't come out in the report. The report is actually more focusing in on where we are with interest rates now. So a little bit of background. Whilst the current bank rate as at the end of the year was 4.5%, the year opened with a UK base rate of 5.25, where it stayed for about the first half of the year before it then started to drop, and it dropped in increments of 0.25 over the course of several months, finishing the year on 4.5. So we were anticipating that drop off much earlier in the year, so we were expecting interest rates to probably reach around 4% by the end of the year, which they didn't. And actually, if you look at the forecast now, under 2.5, we're now forecasting rates to drop off to 3.75 by March 26, whereas actually we would have expected rates to be at 3.5% probably by about now, under forecasts that we had a year ago. So that has been a lot slower than anticipated, which is good for our investments, not so good for the national economy, as we're sort of seeing. Inflation has been sort of up and down a little bit. It did drop quite a bit, and then it's crept up a little bit. So I think that was the main point. Obviously, we've talked about the overall surplus and the reasons for that, and I think I just draw your attention to the fact that we've got balances as at the end of the year of 56.4 million in our investments, so that's investments with sort of UK banks, local authorities and money market funds, and includes the Inspire All loan. In addition to that, it talks about in section 4 the other loans that we have, which includes working capital loans with HDL of $500,000, with the studios, which is in relation to the works that are undertaken there. They've got a working capital facility of 10 million, against which we've drawn down just over 8. There's also longer term 40-year loans to HLL, who are our stock holding company, and they're actually held against the properties. So the company now own 49 properties. So it's that those loans are actually sort of a charge over all of those properties. So it's secured in that respect, and we're earning returns on that sort of over 6%, and that will be the return we're getting over the next 40 years as those loans are repaid. I think that's probably all I wanted to say on Treasury, but happy to take any questions.
No questions, so yeah, move on with the debtors.
Okay, and then on to the final appendix, which is the debt monitor. And I think the first thing I'd say is if you look at the charts on page 75, we've now got a debt curve that looks like it did pre-Brexit. It's taken all sorts of shapes over the past few years, but it's now back to the sort of normal cycle, whereby we see debt on a decline as we start the year. By quarter 2, debt starts to rise again into quarter 3, and the reason for that is because that's when we start raising liability orders. So we will send out bills at the beginning of the year. If people don't pay, we'll send reminders, we'll send a final reminder, and then we'll send a summons, and then we'll go to court for liability orders. So that normally happens around June, July time. So that's why we see that increase during that time, and then we see in the final quarter generally quite a sharp decline in debt, as those liability orders are then enforced and we start seeing payments coming in. Generally, we will see the overall level of debt creep up year on year, but I think for this year, it's the first year for some considerable time where we've actually ended up with debt at the end of the year more or less at the same level as it was at the start of the year. There's a difference of about an 80,000 overall. And you can see there was a significant drop in debt in the final quarter of around about 1.8 million in terms of reducing that overall debt. It's quite a detailed report around debt, which covers all of the different types of debt. I think I'll just sort of touch probably on council tax and business rates. Unfortunately, we didn't hit our collection rate target in year. We fell quite a bit below that. But I would like to reassure members that we have really been pushing debt collection over the course of this year, and what we've seen is a significant amount of prior year debt being collected, particularly in council tax, and that's why we've sort of seen older debt coming down significantly. And actually, when people are paying their debt, we're using that to pay off older debt first, which has had a bit of a negative impact on in-year collection rates. Our collection rate is still at 98%, and we're keeping it at that level, and we will more than achieve that collection rate, albeit we didn't do so in year, but within the first quarter of this year, we would have expected to have hit that level. And the level of debt that we're writing off still remains quite low. We take a report to Cabinet at least once a year to write off debt, and we're writing off way less than 1% of our total debt annually. So we're above our collection targets. If there's any specific areas that there's questions, then happy to take those.
Councillor Lambert.
Just going to the debtors or the debt on the graph on page 75. One of the reasons for the odd shape of the graph in previous years had been because you'd had problems with going to the court or delays by the court. Does the fact that you're back into what you would normally expect, is that an indication that the courts are able to catch up with us? Or yes, the courts are operating more efficiently.
I'd like to say yes, but I would say it's probably more down to the tenacity of my staff that have caused that. We're very good at getting our dates into the court diary at a very early stage. That was something we weren't able to do when the courts were so far behind. The courts are still a long way behind, but we've got all of our dates pre-booked, which means we're able to take our cases. We take our cases en masse on a monthly basis, so we've got those dates secured in the court diary. So.
Councillor Nicholas.
Thank you. Hi Matthew, thank you for your report. The amount in SIL recovery, I'm back on that again. We know that there's this large significant amount, and I know we can't talk about it fully because we're not in part 2, but I would like to try and understand. I mean, it's been on the report now, I think, in legal recovery for as long as I've been 2 years, just over 2 years as a councillor. Can we understand a bit more about where we are with that case now, or is it something that now needs to be brought forward potentially next time into part 2 so that we can discuss it openly? Part 2.
I think all I can say at the moment is that our legal department are working on that. We are taking legal action against that party to try and enforce collection. I don't know how that is going to proceed. It's going to. We have engaged. We got to a position where we had agreed a repayment plan, that didn't happen, so we're now taking further action against them. So, if you want further information, we could potentially do a Part 2 report, or let me take that back to the legal department and see what I'm allowed to share with you.
Alternatively, if that's not something that could happen in the committee, would it be something that I could perhaps come talk to you about, bearing in mind the location of the...
Very happy to do that.
Councillor Quilty, you had a question?
Actually, Louise has already mentioned what I was going to bring up also, and I was going to add something else on to the end of what Louise is saying, is say, when are we likely to see refunds? You know, there's a significant amount outstanding. It's been significantly outstanding for a long, long time. I think that we should either sort of somehow get this brought to an end somehow. Can't just leave it there, or maybe the plan is to leave it there until we're dissolved into a unitary authority in a few years' time. I'll leave you think on that. Cheers.
I don't think there's really an answer to that one, so it was a statement rather than a question. Is there any other question? I don't think I've missed anyone else, have I? So in that case, is everybody, thank you very much. Is everyone happy to note the report? Noted. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. We're now going to move on to agenda item 9, which is the Community Infrastructure Levy, Section 106, Planning Appeals Monitoring Report for 2025, which is going to be presented by George Pavey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, this won't be a particularly long introduction. I think it's obviously a fairly factual report. It provides an update on Section 106, Community Infrastructure Levy, and the planning appeals activity across the borough, obviously between April 2024 and March 2025. The only bit I will draw your attention to is actually table 3.6, I believe. I'm not sure if the title it's been given is incorrect and the data's correct, or whether the data's incorrect and the title's correct, or vice versa. So I might just have to go back and check with the team and then recirculate the table itself. It's only because it clearly doesn't reflect the numbers in the paragraphs below it. So I think it's probably just the wrong title, but just for clarity, I'll circulate that back through DEM services if that's okay, because I think it's just it's probably going to create confusion. I'm sure it's correct somehow, but yeah, that was the only thing I was going to draw your attention to. Otherwise, as I say, it just draws together a factual analysis of the previous monitoring year.
Members, does anyone have any questions? Councillor Morris.
I'm not sure if this is quite the right forum to ask the question, and if it isn't, then just tell me so, and you can tell me to take a hike or speak to me on another occasion. Obviously 106 is a key element to any planning approval, and I'm receiving increasing comments from individuals where we approve planning applications and yet the time it is taken to get the 106 agreements approved is taking an inordinate amount of time. And my understanding is it isn't so much a planning department issue, it's more a legal issue. And it's very worrying when we're all trying to build lots of homes, and yet I'm hearing a number of people saying we can't get around to building because we can't get the 106 agreements agreed. So I'm not quite sure if you want to push me in a different direction, but it is an issue that needs to be sorted.
I suppose I'm going to give probably a heavily caveated planner's answer to this, which I think what we're seeing at the minute, there's obviously new reasons why we're having to use Section 106s. So there's things like biodiversity net gain, which we haven't had to do previously. So it's actually coming up with the wording behind Section 106s and the details behind it. So I think particularly recently, there's been sort of a specific reason or a sort of specific topic for potentially some of the delays. I think probably you refer to legal, and of course, it's not just our own legal department. It's quite often Hertfordshire County Council will be party to this. There's obviously the developers legal team as well. I think they are just complex, and I think it's probably a perfect storm of things sometimes, and I suspect that the usual sort of resourcing as well, particularly in councils, possibly isn't helping it. I think we're constantly looking at ways to streamline. I mean, we are probably off topic slightly because, of course, this is just reporting on the back end receipts. But I think, just speaking on behalf of the planning department and I suppose our relationship with legal, we're always looking at ways to sort of streamline the process and, in particular, look at sort of templated Section 106s, given as much detail up front. So I think it's probably something we're cognizant of. One thing I will say is I've come from a different borough, a different district previously. We sign Section 106s quite quickly here compared to... I know, I'm just... I suppose the point I'm making is it's not just symptomatic of Hertsmere. I think it's a national problem in particular. They are very complex, but yeah, it's on the radar, and you're right to bring it up in terms of we are looking to deliver a huge amount of dwellings, and actually sort of swift resolution of Section 106 is going to be key to delivering that at speed.
Councillor Oakley, did you have something to add on that? I thought I saw you.
Yes, I did. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is something I am acutely aware of, and that I have had to intervene on a number of applications. My view, I mean, George is right that yes, it's complicated. There are lots of parties involved, and the BNG has certainly added to the complexities of it all. I suppose one shouldn't malign certain departments, but I've always found that legal people do have a time frame of their own, and perhaps it's not as speedy as we would like, but I can see how developers can get frustrated when they are actually really trying to get on with a project. And the Section 106 is taking some time. I did actually want just to flag something up on the 106 monies that have come in, and I'll take this opportunity because it's relevant to the time frame. The figures we've got here, which are for the last financial year, I think it's worth noting, particularly as Councillor Morris has mentioned, the length of time it can take to get the Section 106 agreements done, is that the income that is being generated from these is often not reflected until perhaps the following financial year or even the financial year after that. And what we're not seeing on these figures here are the differences that this administration has managed to secure. And I'm specifically cognizant of the fact that we are getting significantly more funds in for transport that are not actually reflected in this report, but will be significantly higher for next year. So I think it's worth bearing in mind that there is a time lag between things that have been negotiated and us actually being able to reflect that that's the money's held.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on with Councillor Butler.
Yeah, that's working. Hello. It's another one, funnily enough, around 106, because obviously I'm looking at the tables on page 4 and 5 here, and the money's held. Now, I know, obviously, and I declare that obviously I'm a councillor on Hertsmere Borough Town Council as well, and we've accessed S106 money is held by Hertsmere Borough Council in the past to do some works on local allotments and so forth. But even they are now struggling to actually access this money that are held by Hertsmere, if there's any held in specific areas. I wonder if that's a problem across the board, that other parishes might be trying to access that money, and what you're going to do about trying to solve that issue at the moment, because that does seem to be a problem. And also looking at the monies that are held by Hertfordshire County Council, does this authority plan to do anything in terms of trying to help get some of that money out of Hertfordshire County Council, actually allocating to the areas that are needing that money? Because looking at that graph there, that's a hell of a lot of cash that could help the residents of this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Just taking the last question, I think obviously a huge number of the HCC monies held will already be allocated towards projects. So I suppose it's not so much a case of allocating and spending it. It's sometimes just when are the projects coming online to draw down those funds. And obviously, there's a huge number, and they vary in terms of their scale as well. Obviously, some of them are on massive infrastructure projects, some of them are on very, very small scale ones. Just in terms of your first comment, just around, I suppose, access. Again, I think obviously a large number of them are allocated anyway, but for those that aren't allocated, I think one of the points we were looking at, I suppose it comes down to the sort of prioritisation of the planning obligations team at the minute. We're obviously trying to push through the sort of new process for SIL spending, looking at obviously how communities can access SIL spending. I think one of the next things we've spoken about as a team is just around the transparency of Section 106 pots funding, and just making that a bit clearer. And it may be that it's not necessarily making it easier to access per se, but just an understanding of what's available and what's there, just to make that a bit easier.
Mr. Chairman, through you, if I can come back just on that. You're saying about making it clearer, which is great, and I welcome that, but we could make it clearer by saying, you're saying that some of this money is already allocated. Can we then not have a list of where that money is allocated, so we actually know what money isn't allocated, so maybe we can potentially look at how we can allocate it, if that makes sense. Lots of allocations there, but I'm quite concerned to try and spend money in Hertsmere for Hertsmere residents who have had the developments built on their doorstep before we are turned into a unitary authority, and make sure that our residents benefit from this money rather than it get lost in a wider unitary and then spent somewhere else within the Hertfordshire area, and we then, the local Hertsmere residents, are suffering with those developments and not actually benefiting via the financial reward that they're actually taking on to suffer, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I want to make sure that we're doing the best we can for our residents before this council is dissolved by the money that we'll be getting. Thank you.
Councillor Lambert.
Just to build on what Richard was saying, this graph 2.2, where we've got the money, is it actually held by Hertfordshire County Council? Have we actually paid over? We've collected it. Have we paid it over to Herts County Council?
I believe so. I will just double. Yep, Matthew's nodding. So yes.
It's worth, because it's worth hanging on to with the rate of return that we're getting. Matthew might like to hang on to it for a bit longer. I think this might be a little bit easier to understand if we knocked off the pence. When you get to a figure of 226,794 and 29 pence, it would be quite useful to knock those off. My other question relates to SIL. Where is it? It is. Oh heavens! Right, page 12 on the SIL report. I was just a bit surprised by some of these figures. The SIL income for Aldenham, South Mimms, Elstree and Boreham Wood, and so on. Aldenham was 133,000, and presumably Potter's Bar and Bushy, theirs is retained by Hertsmere Borough Council. But does that reflect what has been built within those areas? Because Aldenham is the biggest payer, followed by Elstree and Boreham Wood, and then for some reason South Mimms, Riggs and Shenley, which I thought was going in 23-24, they're all down for zero. Could you just expand on that for me, please?
Yeah, so just to be clear, that's obviously purely the money that we are, the 15 or the 25% cut that we receive the 100%, we then send out the 15%, we send it out twice a year. So depending on the 6 months prior to that, we will then send it out. In terms of, can I just check, is your questions referring to development, and as in your awareness is that there's been probably more development in those areas in that time? Is that, I think obviously it's done on, SIL becomes payable when the development's commenced. So it may well be that something has commenced and then not a lot has happened for a very, very long time. So we may have received the money very early on, and then it just so happens that actually the development's been completed, or visually it looks to be proceeding, a year afterwards. It could of course be the other way around, which is if someone's on a payment plan, it could take a number of years to pay that SIL debt off. So it's not necessarily related directly to the development that's taking place at the time. And of course there is the other way, which is they may not have paid on time. That may relate, and I don't know specifically without looking at it, but that may relate obviously to a development that was completed. It could be years previously. We don't have many of them, thankfully, but we're only just receiving the money at that point.
Thank you. Is there any particular reason why Potter's Bar and Bushy aren't included in here? I know they're non-parished, but it would be interesting to see what is accumulating to those non-parished conurbations. Yeah.
I think that's good. I actually asked the team why we hadn't put those on the bottom, and I suppose when I circulate the other table, I could well do that, because that's data we have access to. So yeah, we can do that.
Thank you. I don't think there's any further questions. In that case, is the committee happy to note the report and have the updates? Thank you very much. We'll now move on to agenda item 10, which is the Forward Planning Programme and Committee Work Programme. Do members have any questions at all? I'm going to start with Councillor Kazar because he's got in there first, and we'll then move to Councillor Butler.
Well, this not necessarily regarding the work programme, but this is kind of related to our last committee meeting where I asked Ian Kershaw regarding the task and finish groups and the kind of status of it. Is there any update on it that you can provide?
Yes, absolutely, through you, Chair. So there's two task and finish groups that were registered with this committee. One has been in abeyance for some time, which was the Elstree Film Studios asbestos report, and we've had some advice on that rather than double handle it, it sits with the HSIC. Committee to scrutinise that area. The other one is the service roads task and finish, which I think is probably the one which is particularly on your mind. Yeah. That has stalled slightly, and I'm going to say down to my personal capacity to do the research necessary to bring the next meeting together. I have sent an email out asking members for dates this summer, but apologies, Councillor Kaza, I missed you off that email. I just want to check availability for members over the summer, so I can schedule something for a catch up on that particular one. I think the task group needs 2 more meetings, one to look at the specific case study around Manor Road, and then one to bring all of your findings together. So I think we're nearly there, sorry, Manor Way rather than Manor Road. The legal complexities around Manor Way are slightly more complicated than I knew it was going to be complicated. They were more complicated than I thought, but I'm there and ready to bring a report back to you.
Just to...
Oh, you had a follow-on?
Yeah, just follow on. Then in that case, I hope the members of the other task and finish group have been notified that it's essentially not going ahead.
If that hasn't happened, we will make sure that it has for the Elstree Film Studio ones. Yes, but I believe that they are aware. That I think there's a discussion with group leaders around. I think what was a dynamic situation when the request for a scrutiny review was made. This is probably some 2 years ago now, I think, but things have changed significantly since that time, and the whole subject matter had to be put on hold because of potential legal challenges and issues around that. Subsequent to those being resolved, I think the core issues of the task and finish group have also changed fairly dramatically.
Councillor Butler.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I've already spoken to Ian tonight about the scrutiny that I'd like to do on waste collection in one block of flats, so trying to pinpoint that. So what I'm going to do, working with the officers, I'm going to try and put some stuff together. Hopefully I can bring that back September, and then we can hopefully try and put a future date in the diary, because I want to do a quick task and finish group on the collection, especially around waste and recycling in a block of flats, but I'm homing in on that one area. So I'm going to do some groundwork, bring it back to the next meeting with your agreement, and hopefully then set a date. And I want that to almost be 3 quick meetings, short burst, get it done, get it finished, so I can move on to then looking at if there needs to be policy and go back to the policy review committee.
And just to confirm through you, Chair, on your forward plan, that is marked and noted. It's just pending officer resource to support the actual task and finish.
Yeah, we have discussed this since our last meeting. Councillor Quilty.
Thank you. Is it time now to have a task and finish group to deal with outstanding SIL funds? I raise this in a sort of a nice way, so that officers can have a think and come back to us at the next meeting. If there's no movement, maybe we should actually consider having a task and finish group. So, you know, because at the end of the day, residents are getting extremely concerned in a certain area in the Hertsmere about this issue, and I think Louise would totally support this.
So yeah, again through you, Chair, and looking slightly sideways at Matthew as well. We will take advice. I think it's really important that we take some legal advice on that situation, and at a minimum we can circulate a further briefing note to members, and according to that note, consider whether or not a task and finish group is the best way to progress it. or is there another route? But we need to take some legal advice as to what's the most appropriate route. But I think we've heard loud and clear the members' concerns that they wish to see this particular issue resolved.
Yeah, I think the problem you've got to accept that it's affecting a number of residents, and they're in a really tricky situation, and we need to sort it out. It's no longer just dragging it on for legal reasons for another year or 2 years. It needs to be done and dusted. We've got to somehow sort this out. Okay, so I'll wait to hear from you next time, maybe.
Definitely. Councillor Nicholas, did you have your hand up? You did.
I most certainly did, but you ignored me. No, I'm joking. Kipps Green, 2 meetings ago, I think now, because I wasn't at the last one, Kipps Green wasn't able to attend from HBC Services for Young People, so we didn't hear their annual report. And I think, if I recollect at the time, we talked about trying to get them back to talk to us. I note that they're on here for the 9th of December, which feels like an awful long time. Was that the soonest that they were able to attend, or are we able to get them back sooner than that?
Yeah, sorry. I know Alex has chased as assertively and diplomatically as he can on this, but that's the earliest date that we can get them. But then that update will cover the full year, so they'll do the retrospective as well.
Perfect. Haven't missed anyone else? No, perfect. In that case, happy to note the report and obviously of all the various updates that we're going to have in the next meeting, and then we'll move on to agenda item 11. Any other business which the chairman considers urgent? I confirm there's no urgent business. Agenda item 12, dates of future meetings. The next meeting will be scheduled here on Tuesday the 16th of September, and I can confirm this meeting is closed at